Hello, my name is Jacob, and I am a Norse Pagan. And today I want to talk about the god of music and poetry and of drink, Bragi. But we have a lot of questions to answer about Bragi. One, is he really a god? Was he really the son of Odin? Was he really the first skald? Or was he just a man? Was he just this man named Bragi Bodilson? Or was he just a man in the early days who got exalted to godhood, who got welcomed to the gates of Valhalla? There's a lot of questions to answer with him. And the source material we have on him really just gives us more questions than it gives us answers. And there's just not a lot to go off of. So there's three things I want to show you today. One of those things is my prayer to Bragi, my prayer to him, and kind of how I experience worshiping him. But also I want to show you the source materials we do have. I have 3 books I want to show you today. So I have the Poetic Edda, I have the Norse Myths, A Guide to Gods and Heroes, and then I have a Tales of Norse Mythology. I looked at several books, several sources, but these 3 kind of had everything we need to talk about. So I want to talk about these. But without further ado, let's go ahead and show you my prayer to Bragi. Bragi, god of skalds, the first skald, son of Odin, I summon you to my home tonight. I have a gift for you, Bragi, a wise one. A creative one, greatest of singers, greatest of skalds. I welcome you into my home with a beer. Strong beer. Extremely strong beer, actually. Welcome to my home, Bragi. Come drink with me. Come enjoy my hospitality. Bragi, the roots run deep beneath my feet. The branches reach high above the cosmos. To the core my roots go. To the core my roots go. To the universe my branches stretch. Deep into the surface the bones grow. Further does the stone become covered in snow. I feel my ancestors. I feel their bones beneath my feet. I feel the stones echo their voices, now still in this age of man. Their voices are not lost. Their stories are not buried. I will carry their bones. I will carry their saga. Their roots run deep beneath my feet. Their branches reach high towards the gods. Bragi, this poem is for you. It's for no one else. Bragi, I hope you hear my words. You hear what I have to say. Bragi, this looked good on paper. There we go. That's better. Yeah. Now that looks dramatic. Alright, remember folks, my friends, my family, I'm not perfect and I make mistakes, and sometimes I think it's a smart idea to burn things inside my own home. Did not expect it to catch that fast. Everything's fine though, but be safer than me sometimes. I mean, once it started going down, I mean, it was quite dramatic and nice. Oh, that's hot. Yeah. Anyways, back to Bragi. So giving to Bragi has been an interesting experience. I definitely think poetry is a great way to connect. Reading him poetry, no matter how good or bad it is. Obviously maybe you should get better the more you read, but at the same time I feel like taking the effort to show your creativity and show you want to give something to the gods that is part of you, part of your soul. That's so important. And that's something that even beer can't be. I mean, yes, I went out and bought this beer and I shared it with him, and I had communion with him. But at the same time, I feel like that note meant more. I feel like that poetry meant more to Bragi. And I definitely, to me, he's definitely a god of hospitality as much as he is a god of music, a god of drinking. I feel like that was a big thing for me, and that prayer was to welcome him into my home in the hall, and the halls of the future, to show that we need creativity. We need Bragi as much as we worship Thor and Odin and Tyr and Freya and Frigg. We need Bragi. We need creativity, because this is a folk. This folk is a folk of craft. It's a folk of beauty, a folk of art, and we can't lose that. So I think Bragi is going to play a very important role in the future, and even now. So I definitely wanted to give him that. Make sure he knows that we care for him, that we need him. Also, something I did is I did play ukulele, because while this is a great prop, it was a wonderful gift from Sean Death from OC and the Jupiter. It doesn't actually play hardly at all. We tuned it up really well, and it's missing a string. We tuned it up, and it was literally out of tune, and 5 minutes afterwards. I mean, it's just the strings weren't the best. I know Sean even said he had a few problems with it, but it was still a wonderful gift, and I really love having it here to represent my relationship with Bragi. But I do play ukulele. Shocker, shocker. I went to art school, come on now. And I still remember a few chords. It's been quite some time since I played. So I spent some time here, playing the instrument, learning it once again. And even that, and giving that time to creativity, giving that time to music. I'm sure his ears were bleeding by the end, but I feel like it was a great way to spend time with Bragi, and it's something that you can do while worshiping him. I also spent some time with the drum, because, well, this is not necessarily an instrument that we know Bragi played, but we honestly don't know much at all. So I feel like bringing this drum in that represents the gatherings and what the Wisdom of Odin has done, and just the folk in general, I feel like it was a great thing to bring in and just kind of drum for a bit. And it was nice just to spend some time with the drum. All right, so I think it's time to move into the source material. I don't want to spend all day on those. I hope you enjoyed that prayer. I hope it gave you something to go off of. Don't burn down your house like I tried to do. Watch out, horns foam up really quick. But let's move into the source materials. So let's read through these real quick, and then we'll head outside. Yeah, we'll head outside. No, we'll stay in here. It looks way cooler in here. We'll stay in here. We'll read this. We'll stay in here, and then we'll discuss what comes up by reading these 3 books. All right. So most of the information we have on Bragi within the Poetic Edda comes from Lokasenna, which is a poem where Loki comes in and starts assaulting all the gods. And he does speak directly to Bragi during this conversation, so we get a few tidbits of information. I'm basically going to read everything that's written. Bragi gets a whole 5 paragraphs. So let's read those paragraphs real quick. So Lokasenna, stanza 8. Bragi says, "The gods will never show you to a seat at this feast. Gods know what company they want to share a happy evening's drinking with." Lokasenna, stanza 11, which starts with Loki. "Hail gods and goddesses, all high and holy Asir, except for the one god who sits furthest down the bench, and that one there, Bragi." And Bragi returns with, "I will give you a horse and a sword. I offer you these freely, and a ring, but in exchange, please do not slander the gods. Don't awake their anger." And then Loki says, "Since when have you had a treasure or a horse to give? All of the gods and elves inside this hall, you're the out of all the gods and elves inside this hall, you are the biggest coward." And Bragi returns with, "If you were outside and you had not come inside Aegir's hall, I would be holding your severed head. I'd pay you back that way with all your lies." So what can we draw from that? Not a lot. Loki doesn't like Bragi. Loki thinks he's lazy. He's called a coward. The first line is probably the one that gives us the most, which is, "The gods will never show you to a seat at this feast. The gods know that what company they want to share and a happy evening's drinking with." So he's trying to maintain the peace. He's trying to, keep the festivities and hospitality good for everyone else. Really, Odin's the only one that allows Loki to come to these feasts because he has the blood oath of them. So Bragi cares about the feast, is what we can draw from that. From what I understand, that's all that Bragi gets in the Poetic Edda. Correct me if I'm wrong. Tell me what other poem he's mentioned in. But far as I know, within the Poetic Edda itself, we don't have any more information on Bragi. All right, so into the Norse myths, a guide to gods and heroes. We're left with a section on Bragi, but it quickly moves away from him. So we have, "Finally there is Bragi, who is the god of poetry, eloquence, and language, and is married to Idun. Bragi was most likely originally a human. One of the earliest named in Old Norse was called Bragi the Old, and some of his poems have been preserved. He seems to have been a late addition to the pantheon." Okay, so that gives us a lot more questions than it does answers. And it doesn't really refer to anything within Lokasenna. So this is one of the things that comes up, is the fact that he may have not been a god originally, or a god at all. Okay, I just have more questions now. I don't really have answers. And then we have, and that was it. That was all that was written on Bragi in that entire book. Now, this book, I have my problems with this book. So if you've if you've watched my Norn video, you know I have a decent problem with this book because it seems to get a lot of its information from hoo-ha. So there is a decent section on Bragi. It mostly goes into the story of how Bragi was born to Odin. So Odin, you can read this in Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology as a really great rendition of the story of how the Mead of poetry. In Odin's quest to go get the Mead cauldron back, and the Mead of poetry, he encounters Gunlod, which is a giant woman who is guarding the poetry, or the mead of poetry. And Odin ends up seducing her, having sex with her, and the child between those two was Bragi. So I'll just read what is literally written in the 1.5 paragraphs here for Bragi. Although Odin thus won the gift of poetry, he seldom made use of it himself. It was reserved for his son Bragi, the child of Gunlod, to become the god of poetry and music and to charm the world with his songs. White-bearded bard, Bragi, his gold harp, sweeps in yet softer stealth the day. As soon as Bragi was born, in the stalactite-hung cave where Odin had won Gunwald's affection, the dwarfs presented him with a magical golden harp, and setting him on one of their own vessels, they sent him out into the wide world. As the boat gently passed out of subterranean darkness and floated over the threshold of Nain, the realm of the dwarf of death, Bragi, the fair and immaculate young god, who until then had shown no signs of life, suddenly sat up and seizing the golden harp beside him, he began to sing the wondrous song of life, which rose at that time to the heavens, and they sank down to the dread realm of Hel, goddess of death. And then it has his poem from the Lay of Grimnir. Yggdrasil ash is of all trees most excellent, and of all ships Skiplatnir, of the Asir Odin, and of the horses Sleipnir, Bifrost of bridges, and of skulls Bragi. While he played, the vessel was wafted gently over sunlit waters, and soon touched the shore. Bragi then proceeded on foot, threading his way through the bare and silent forest, playing as he walked. At the sound of this tender music, the trees began to bud and bloom, and the grass underfoot was rimmed with countless flowers. Here he met Idun, daughter of Evold, the fair goddess of immortal youth, whom the dwarves allowed to visit the earth from time to time. When her approach, nature invariably assumed its loveliest and gentlest aspects. It was only to be expected that two such beings should feel attracted to each other, and Bragi soon won the fair goddess for his wife. Together they hastened to Asgard, where they both were warmly welcomed, and where Odin, after tracing runes on Bragi's tongue, decreed that he should be the heavenly minstrel and composer of songs in honor of the gods and the heroes whom he received in Valhalla. And then it does have a section on Bragi worship. It mostly talks about how at most feasts Bragi's name is brought up. As Bragi was the god of poetry, eloquence, and song, the northern races also called poetry by his name. And skalds of either sex were frequently designated as Bragamen and Braga women. Bragi was greatly honored by all those northern races, and hence his health was always drunk on solemn or festive occasions, but especially at funeral feasts and at Yuletide celebrations. In art, Bragi is generally represented as an elderly man with long white hair and a beard, and holding the golden harp from which his fingers could draw such magic strains. So now here we are. So for the most part, that is the most consistent sources I could find on Bragi. I saw several sources that mentioned the tongue carving. I saw, mentions of his long white beard. I saw mentions of his, mother Gunlod and his father Odin. But I also saw many mentions of him being just a normal man that sung really well, that he was this bard called Bragi the Old, or Bragi Bodilson, and that he was he was a human that sung so well that he was welcomed into the halls of Asgard by Odin, which would kind of match that story. Maybe he was a human wandering through the woods, and he was playing music so well, it went over the goddess Idun, who was walking around with him, and then she took him up to Odin and was like, "This is my husband, he plays great music, and I think he should be the Skald of Asgard." Maybe that's what happened. But like I said, I feel like there's more questions than there is answers. Take from that what you will. Those are the main things I could find about him scattered throughout. Again, there's a couple of sources that intertwine, and there's some sources like Norse mythology that definitely seem like they're out of left field. But again, this is what I could find. If you know more about Bragi, please send them to me. If you have sources, please send it to me. It's just I'm having trouble finding original sources for Bragi information. Because I've read the story of Gunlod and Odin and the Mead of poetry, but I never heard about Bragi being the son of those two. So I don't know. If you have any information, please share it with me. But with my last few minutes here, let's discuss what this means. So ultimately, I think Bragi is a deity just because I can feel him, because I can feel his presence. When I give to Bragi, I do feel a presence looking down on me. I even saw somewhere that Bragi could just be Odin. It's another guise of Odin, but we're sitting here, and I feel like anyone could say that about any of the gods. Oh, it's just Odin in disguise. It's just one of Odin's other names. So I feel like that's a slippery slope that's really just not going to go anywhere. So ultimately, I do think Bragi is a deity. I don't know if he was originally a deity. I do kind of like the idea, the story of him just playing music really well, meeting the goddess Idun while walking through the woods, and she basically was just like, wow, this guy's really good, let's take him back to Asgard. Odin's like, wow, he's really good, and he basically became exalted as a god in a way. But that also begs the question of, like, can that still happen? Because I feel like that's a very slippery slope, because we definitely don't want to go around telling people, like, hey, if you're really good at something, you might be considered a god. That's a dangerous slope, because that's just, I feel like that is a slippery slope to the abyss. Because even if that was true, maybe we can become gods in a sense, or maybe become venerated enough that we become some form of deity or some kind of presence. Like if you pray enough to Bragi, the greatest skald of all time, eventually he does gain a presence, a power to reach from the other life. Maybe that's true, and maybe that's enough to be a god, but we just can't know that. So the best thing we can do is just live our life to the best, be the best version of ourselves, and then maybe one day, the gods are like, wow, this person's really good, they're a god now. But again, I don't know. That's definitely some Buddhism type stuff too, because Buddhism, you're trying to reach enlightenment and eventually become a Buddha. And that's kind of like the dream. That's the main Buddhist dream, is to eventually achieve enlightenment and become a Buddha yourself. And that's a very basic outline of Theravada Buddhism mostly, and there's a lot of other different types of Buddhism. But for the most part, it was achieve enlightenment to become a higher being. So in a way, maybe that's the route this faith is. I do think that this faith has more in common with Eastern philosophy than it does with Christianity and monotheism. So perhaps. But ultimately, I think what we take away from these sources is that Bragi is definitely a presence. He was definitely hailed for his great music, and we know enough of feast and names of places that Bragi was definitely talked about. And I have seen, again, I hate the book honestly at this point, but A Practical Heathen's Guide to Asatru does have a hail to Bragi quite often. And so it seems like he is very prominent in the community, even though we have so little written about him. In fact, I'd go as far as to say, for how little we have written about him, we seem to worship him a lot and seem to talk about him a lot, even though we have very little source material. And I definitely think the setup I gave here with the musical instrument being the crucial zone for him, the beer, the burning of the poem, I feel like this has been a really great way to connect with him, so I highly recommend it. But really, I feel like the biggest question he brings up is, what if he was just a man that eventually achieved godhood just from playing music so darn good? And again, I think the best answer I can have for that is we can't think like that. If that, just like enlightenment in Buddhism, if that happens, it happens. But if you're trying to achieve it, it'll never happen. And there's just really no sense in trying to even seek that out. But also, I do think that if you're a creative person, I think Bragi is a wonderful source. And I can't wait to hear other people's sagas and stories and poems. And if I would leave you with anything this episode, I think you should pray to Bragi. I think you should give to him, because he is a very warm and calming presence. But also I do think that, if you're creative, he's really going to help you. But just in general, bringing him into your home is a warm and exciting and friendly presence. Is he kind of an egomaniac sometimes? I definitely get that from him. But most artists are. If you've ever been around musicians, they're all a little self-absorbed in a way, but that doesn't mean they're not bad, good people. I used to do concert photography actually back in an age long ago, and musicians are really cool people, but they're definitely a little bit of ego people. A little bit. They kind of have to be. Gosh, no. Okay, I end on this video is Einar Selvik Bragi? Is he just Bragi reborn? I'll give him that, because damn, Einar Selvik is a really good skald. That's what I'll leave you with. Einar Selvik Bragi? But folk, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it gave you a slightly more in-depth look of who Bragi is. Let me know if you have any other source material you know of. And get out there, show me your shrines to Bragi, show me your prayers. But folk, until next time, until the hall, skald.